taking them away from people or even limiting their exposure here. But the fact of the matter is, Florida's Governor Rick Scott wants to raise the age at which you can get these weapons to 21. And that was something that wasn't necessarily universally supported by some prominent Republicans, including a member of the president's cabinet. Take a look. Would that mean that you are opposed to what Florida Governor Rick Scott wants to do, sir, and that is raise the age at which you can get access to those weapons to 21?
You know, I think very highly of the governor, and I think it should be on the table, especially for semis.
I'm not inclined right now to raise the age. I think we need to focus on making sure that we protect law-abiding citizens' rights to bear arms, while also taking action to ensure that those that should not have access to guns do not.
All right, now the one thing the president did propose today, and seemed to think he could do this by executive order, or at least something he could act on his own to do and maybe argue it out in the courts later, is take away these so-called bump stocks, the devices which were not used necessarily in this school shooting, but was, of course, a key part of that Las Vegas shooting that claimed 58 lives, a device that essentially can make a semi-automatic weapon behave like an automatic one. But beyond that, there is some consternation over where the middle ground will be. Let's discuss this with the Republican governor of Maine, Paul LePage, who joins you right now. Governor, I know you were with the president today among those governors, and the issue of back and forth, concern background checks and how far you go and all of that. Where do you stand on this?
I believe that background checks are absolutely important, but as I said to the president today and asked him to, we have to take a look at mental illness in this country, and some of the federal regulations on HIPAA prevent us from having true background checks. We can check the background of someone who's committed a crime, but we don't know what their mental state is. And so I think that needs to be loosened up, and we need to have the ability to do that. I do believe that there was a lot of good dialogue today. I think there's a lot of good suggestions being made, but I do believe that we got to get the guns away from people in domestic violence. We got to get guns away from people that have committed crimes against others. And I do believe that we have to look at mental illness as one of the elements that needs to be addressed in the whole discussion about guns.
What about raising the age of those who get their hands on such weapons?
My feeling about the age is a little bit different than Governor Scott. And in the state of Maine, for instance, you can't buy a pack of cigarettes unless you're 21 years old. I believe that we have to decide what age is going to be an adult, and we have to pick an age and let's stay there. If it's 21, that's fine, but it's got to be for signing contracts. It's got to be for not only owning guns, but going to war. If you're going to raise the age, and let's treat everybody the same.
Governor, you're pretty much your own man on a lot of these issues, but one of the things that comes up, and the president even quasi-joked about it, I think, is that everyone's afraid of the NRA to take on the NRA. There's nothing to be afraid of. Do you believe that? I mean, because the NRA does exert a great deal of power and influence, it is said, over people in your party, unduly so?
I think it's unduly. I think the NRA wants to protect Second Amendment rights, but I've never heard anyone at the NRA saying that bad people should have guns, that people that hurt others should have guns. I don't believe that for a second. I support the NRA. I believe that they want law-abiding citizens to have the right to bear arms, but people that should not have them should not have them. People with intellectual and mental disabilities, people that will hurt others. I'm a firm believer that if you're ever convicted of domestic violence, you should not be allowed to have a gun.
Much has been made on these background checks about how far you go, that once you have any hint, or your child has any hint of either taking medication or anything like that, it could spread to be a scarlet letter on everybody who has had any issue, and all of a sudden they are ostracized. What do you think?
Well, I really think that we need to take a hard look at mental illness, because, it only takes one person that is ill to cause a whole lot of damage to society and kill a lot of people. So I'm willing to take a look at mental illness, and I said to the president today, I think we need to take a look at our federal laws, because people, I believe psychiatrists, psychologists who treat people that are a danger to themselves and others should not have guns. And I do firmly believe that, and I think that mental illness is a big problem that we've just looked the other way. And when we look the other way, people die.
You know, Governor, another issue came up with your counterpart from Washington State, a Democrat, who had kind of zinged the president a little bit on his idea that teachers should be armed, and it got a little testy. What did you think of that? He was essentially saying that wouldn't work. Teachers teach. They shouldn't have to worry about also arming themselves and you know, fighting off killers.
Well, the way I look at it is, if he chooses to do that in Washington State, that's fine. In the state of Maine, I want to protect teachers, I want to protect students, and we're going to do what we have to do. And I don't believe for a second that advertising gun-free zones is the right place to go.
All right, but just to be clear, sir, when you're talking about arming teachers, or what the president talking about arming teachers, he wasn't saying, I take it, you're not saying that this applies to all teachers, that you no. Just... those who are interested, or those who have some arms background or know a little bit about weaponry like that, it would be good for them to be armed.
He wasn't restricting it to teachers. What he said was, if you have properly trained people that work in the school system, they could, in fact, have guns, and he would support that. He gave an example of an assistant principal who was a Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL, who was an assistant principal, and he carried, could carry a gun. I think if they're well trained, I see nothing wrong with it. I don't think it should be mandatory. I think it should be voluntary. But if I knew that a well-trained personnel in the school was there to protect our children, I find that to be a good move.
Governor LePage, thank you very much, sir. Very good having you.
It's a pleasure to be back.
All right, in the meantime, the president was also highly critical of some of those sheriff deputies responding to that school. Take a look.
You know, I got to watch some deputy sheriffs performing this weekend. They weren't exactly Medal of Honor winners, all right? The way they performed was, frankly, disgusting.
All right, now the White House, just to be clear, is still not calling for Sheriff Scott Israel of Broward County to resign, but some lawmakers there are saying at the very least he should be suspended and scrutinized. In fact, an investigation into the whole matter is going on. Florida State Speaker of the House, Richard Corcoran, with us right now. Speaker, thank you very much for joining us. Do you think that the chief has to go, or are you advocating a suspension, or what?
Well, the process is, I believe he has to go, and the process for that is under our Constitution. We don't have the authority to impeach, but the governor has the authority to remove local officials. And so what we did is we sent him a letter and said, under your authority in the Constitution, and it's for misfeasance, malfeasance, neglect of duty, incompetence, of which the sheriff has all of the above. We said under that constitutional provision, suspend him from office, move somebody else in there, and then it's up to the Senate ultimately to whether to decide to vote to reinstate him or remove him completely. We want him fully removed, but the first step is having the governor suspend him and putting someone else in there.
It's tougher, right, Speaker, when it's a duly elected official, right?
Yeah, it's very tough. When listen, we're the first legislature in years that have impeached judges for corruption. We're the first legislature that's been sued by liberal special interest groups left and right. We've gone after and sued entertainers for misspending state money. This is no different. When you have somebody that has been absolutely incompetent, malfeasance, misfeasance, neglect of duty, I think it's incumbent for him to be out of office. And the governor did a great job. What he immediately did was send down FDLE, our own statewide law enforcement, and said, take over this, investigate, figure out what's going on, because we're not getting answers quick enough, and the answers we're getting are questionable at best.
All right, now this original deputy was supposed to be stationed in the school, and he was armed, and he was outside and never went in. Now his lawyer is saying that he thought that the shots were coming from the outside. What do you think of that?
There's been so many misreports. First it was said that he didn't know there were shots. They thought it was firecrackers. Now we have an audio where he says shots fired, shots fired. The fact of the matter is, until we get FDLE, until we suspend the sheriff and get people on the ground who can tell us the truth and figure out what happened immediately, does anyone believe that the sworn sitting sheriff, the law enforcement officer for the whole county, waited until 8 days later to figure out that this guy didn't go into charging into the building? No, I'm sure he said, "Get me the video. I want to know what the heck went on," and he knew it. But I think they're holding information. They're not giving it to us quickly enough. And it's not just one incident or two incidents or 3 or 4 or 5. He admits that he's got half of his, everyone involved investigated. The people who went out to investigate the kid, he's investigating for not doing the proper. The people in the cars outside the school being investigated. That guy, this SRO, investigated and fired. He's investigating whether or not they stopped first responders from getting in there and helping the students. He's investigating whether the deal he has with the superintendent of schools that says a no arrest policy, whether the child, that the killer did bring in bullets, knives, and everything else, and nothing was done. All of this is just an absolute incompetent mess. We have to fix it. We have 17 people that who've lost their lives because of this.
Speaker, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
All right, and all of this going on when stocks were advancing today, almost 400 points. What the heck was happening? We'll get the read now from FEN's Nicole Pedalides at the New York Stock Exchange. Nicole.
Neil, well, we did see the rally continue from Friday. In fact, on Friday, we were up 350 points, as you just noted, about a 400-point gain today, just off the highs of about 422 points. So what's driving the rally? Ultimately, we have had a bumpy time of it. We've seen rising interest rates, and that has weighed on stocks. But you can see today up 400 points on that intraday chart. But turning to those 10-year bond yields, which actually have dropped for 4 days in a row, coming off of those recent 4-year highs, you can see that the 10-year Treasury yield moved lower again. There's really this optimism, big picture on the markets, and also that people are getting a little more comfortable with rising rates and inflation. Then there was technology. Technology has been a real leader. We've seen Netflix and Amazon hitting new all-time highs. Google also gained, not a high, but certainly we've seen technology. That actually pushed the NASDAQ in the green for the month of February. And then take a look at JP Morgan, Nike, Boeing, Cisco. All of those hit highs. 3 of the 4 hit all-time highs, and Cisco was a winner, moving to a 52-week high. That was
shepherd of the Lord. Billy Graham is that person. I'm unbelievably blessed to have met him. I also had the honor of bringing my mother and dad's greetings to Franklin and the family. Billy Graham and Dad were great buddies, and I know he wished he could come too, but he's not moving around much these days. But his spirit and heart is here. Anyway, God bless Billy Graham.
All right, former President Bush, I keep going back to this very, very moving letter he wrote to anyone and anyone interested in just how he viewed Billy Graham. Not only how he played a central role in bringing him to God and getting him away from drinking, but one final story I just want to relay here, quoting his letter. One night, while Dad was away on a trip during his presidency, Mother and I had dinner at the White House. Eventually, we got to talking about religion and who gets to go to heaven. I made the point the New Testament says clearly that to get to heaven, one must believe in Christ. Mother asked about the devout who don't believe in Jesus but do God's work by serving others. She then took advantage of one of the benefits of being First Lady, picked up the phone and asked the White House operator to call Reverend Graham. It wasn't long before a reassuring Southern voice was on the line. He told us, as I recall, Barbara and George, I believe what is written in the New Testament, but don't play God. He decides who goes to heaven, not you. A man who's being remembered in a special way in this country. On Wednesday, when his body will lay in honor in the Capitol, something that has gone to very few individuals. His son, Franklin Graham, speaking now.
People of North Carolina for their outpouring of love and support for my father, our family. Driving from Asheville to Charlotte on Saturday is something I'll never forget. Every overpass, every interchange, hundreds, in some places thousands of people. And I'm just so grateful for the support, and I want to thank you all for the coverage. And of course, we're very grateful that the President, Bush, came today with Laura. That was a great honor. And so to the people of North Carolina, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your kindness to my father. He would say if this is too much about Billy Graham, he wouldn't be happy. he wanted it to be more about the Lord Jesus Christ. So thank you so very much, and God bless you.
Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham, we were mentioning as his body is now in Charlotte, North Carolina, but will move to the Capitol. A very, very rare honor for a private citizen, where he will be laying an honor in the Capitol Rotunda. Rosa Parks was the last private citizen afforded that very, very unique recognition, and the impact that, in this case, the 99-year-old Reverend had on this country and Democratic and Republican presidents alike. It was President Bush who said that he moved me in ways I'm only beginning to appreciate even now. Back to God, off the drink, and into history. We'll have more after this. The Supreme Court hearing oral arguments today in a case that could deal a potentially lethal blow to unions. Fox News correspondent Jillian Turner at the Supreme Court with more. Jillian.
Hi, Neil. High stakes in this case for American government workers, labor unions, and the 2018 midterms. Now, in 22 states nationwide, government employees can be forced to pay a portion of their salary to a union, whether they want to or not.
I don't feel that the union, represents me 100%, in what I believe and what I'd like to do. And on top of that, nobody asked me if I wanted to join the union.
Critics say that with those payments, workers are also being forced to fund the union's political candidates. American labor unions make political donations to Democrats totaling around $100 million each election cycle.
100% of what a government union does is political by nature. Even President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was a strong advocate for collective bargaining rights, strong advocate for unions, he was uncomfortable. He was against the power of government unions.
But advocates like Illinois' Attorney General insist that government unions aren't inherently political and that when they're weak, American workers will suffer.
See a steep and fast decline in our middle class, greater economic inequality in our country.
The court did revisit this issue 2 years ago in the wake of Justice Scalia's passing, but deadlocked on the issue. So now with President Trump's appointee Neil Gorsuch on the bench, he's widely expected to cast the deciding vote against public sector unions. And if he does, it could speed up their already rapid decline. But we'll have to wait for the court's official decision in coming weeks, Neil, as Gorsuch stayed completely silent throughout today's hearing. Neil?
Thank you very much, Jillian. All right, now the Illinois governor, Bruce Rauner, with us right now. His state is on the front lines in this battle. Governor, I hear from a lot of these public union workers who are saying, well, wait a minute, this is really a not-so-veiled attempt just to crush unions. You say what?
I say absolutely not. I filed this original lawsuit when I first became governor of Illinois 3 years ago because I believe it's about freedom of speech and freedom of political association. It is unfair for a government union to force government employees to pay dues when many of them do not agree with the political positions of that union. And in fact, all government unions, by the nature of their work, are political 100% in everything they do. And restoring freedom of speech is critically important.
Now, the unions will come right back at you, Governor, and you've heard this argument quite a bit. Those workers are the beneficiary of those due-paying members and what they got for that, and the pay raises, the benefits, etc. So they're getting their cake and eating it too. I strongly disagree with that. Basically, I think they're being hurt by forced dues paying. Many of them would be able to make more if they were not in a union and they were paid based upon merit and productivity and their effectiveness for taxpayers. And that's the way I believe everyone in government should be paid. I also think that the power of government unions, when it's unlimited and unfettered, basically is a conflict of interest. It's organization against the common good. When a government union boss can give campaign cash to a politician to get him elected and then turn around and negotiate an unaffordable contract with that politician, it's a conflict. If that happened in the private sector, somebody would go to jail. We shouldn't accept it in the government sector. We should have a balance of power between taxpayers and the insiders inside government bureaucracy. We did reach out, Governor, to the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, better known as ASME. They provided a statement, and I quote here, "In the face of ruthless, dishonest attacks against their freedom to come together in strong unions, working people are drawing the line. We stand united in fighting a rigged system that rewards the super wealthy at everyone else's expense." What do you think?
I think that's completely false. I think what's rigged is the way government is rigged against taxpayers in America. In too many states, forced government unionism denies workers their rights of political association and free speech, and it's an insider deal, a corrupt bargain between government unions and the politicians they elect, and that they basically bribe to give them unaffordable deals that hurt taxpayers. The system's rigged against working families in the state of Illinois and across America, and it costs taxpayers dearly in unfair ways.
All right, now, how do you feel about private sector workers who are part of unions and have to pay those dues? Does the same apply, in your opinion?
I think it's completely different. There's a huge difference between government unions and trade unions. In the private sector, in private business, there's no corrupt bargain. They are not allowed to basically bribe executives in businesses to give them unaffordable contracts. Somebody would go to jail in the private sector.
But all those workers are required to be part of that union.
In some states they are and some not, and that's okay. It's up to the state to decide. Because in the private sector, the speech isn't political in its nature. In government, everything a government union does is political and impacts taxpayers and impacts freedom of speech. That's what's at issue in this case. And frankly, government unions are fundamentally different. They're allowed to bribe politicians that they then negotiate with. That's wrong, and that's the reason Franklin Delano Roosevelt was against the power of government unions, and he supported private sector unions.
In this meeting, I don't know if you were part of it with the president on gun matters and school safety matters. Do you agree with your counterpart at Washington State who said we shouldn't arm teachers, that that's a slippery, dangerous slope?
Yes, I tend to agree with that. I think we should have a fulsome discussion about safety. I certainly support armed security guards at schools, but I'm not so sure about teachers.
All right, what about stiffer background checks, even raising the age for some people to get their hands on these weapons?
Well, in Illinois, we've already raised ages to get handguns, and you need permission of a parent if you're younger than 21 to get a long gun. We have some of the toughest gun laws in America already in the state of Illinois. So I look forward to a good, fulsome discussion about the issues at the national level.
The president tried to reassure those in those rooms, quit being afraid of the NRA. I'm paraphrasing, Governor, you know better than I. But a lot of people are. Do you think that's justified, or is the president right to say, you know, you're more on the same page than you think?
Well, I don't think anybody should be afraid of any particular advocacy group. I do believe we should respect the United States Constitution, which lays out protections on these issues, and we should have a good discussion about the ability to keep our citizens safer. We can find ways to do it.
All right, because one of the things the president mentioned, sir, as I'm sure you're aware, is you know, those bump stocks, that with a wave of the pen, I assume he was talking executive order, memoranda, he would stop that and not wait for Congress to do something on it, even though that was not the issue here. It was, and certainly in Las Vegas. What do you think of that?
Well, in Illinois, there was a bump stock ban that came to the General Assembly. It didn't pass because there were a bunch of other regulations added to it. If a clean bump stock ban bill came to my desk, I'd look at the detail of it, but I'd probably sign it.
All right. Governor, thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Well, the former Australia Prime Minister told me, you know, from a 1996 mass shooting incident in Tasmania, Australia, that killed 35. It led to a major crackdown on guns. Now, I asked the former Australia Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, what we could learn from that.
I grew up on a farm in rural Australia. We always had a gun, and that was to deal with feral animals. But the idea that my father and his father before him would need a semi-automatic weapon to keep down, you know, shall we say, wild animals on the farm is just kind of a nonsense.
In this 90s mass shooting. It was a semi-automatic weapon, right?
Yeah. So it happened in 1996. Right. It was at a tourism resort in the island of Tasmania, peaceful as all get out. And then suddenly we as a country were confronted with this. I congratulate my Conservative predecessor, Mr. Howard, for having done this. It's been bipartisan policy since, but more importantly, touch wood, we've not had a mass shooting since. And look, there's just a bit of common...
Was that the catalyst, you think?
I believe so, because I understand when we say that we can't certify the sanity of each individual member of our society. I get that. But let me tell you, it's easier to disarm somebody who's got a single action weapon at their disposal than it is for someone who can pump out hundreds of rounds.
But you don't have it enshrined in your Constitution like we do.
Well, you know, there are multiple interpretations of your Second Amendment, and the ability to raise a militia to defend yourselves against the dastardly return of the British after the Revolutionary War. For that